Welcome to Zero Shot Espresso, the show for AI engineers who are tired of building data pipelines. In this podcast, we talk to engineers and founders about deep systems engineering and the messy reality of data in the age of AI. My name is Jay, your host for the show. I'm co-founder of Daft, and we are building data systems to power AI products. Hey everyone, really excited to have Jaya on today. Jaya is a partner at Foundation Capital, investing in early stage enterprise software and the infrastructure powering the next wave of AI. Jaya, I would love for you to introduce yourself, but maybe a quick introduction is, Jaya built her first startup at 19 while studying at Georgia Tech, working in multiple startups that were later acquired and previously advised tech companies at McKinsey as well. Before becoming a partner at Foundation, you joined as chief of staff, I believe, and you kind of worked closely with founders and built a communities ever since. Welcome to the pod, Jaya. Really excited to have you on board and talking more about the latest topic on Twitter, which is context graphs.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. And I love that our names are almost so similar.
One letter apart, yes. Yeah. Excited to maybe let's just dive right in, this word context graphs, I feel like really over Christmas last year is when you all made the post, and I hadn't seen the term around before that. So maybe just 1 minute speed run. What is this idea of context graphs, and why does it matter, you think, today in the AI age?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Like, I think if you take a step back, 2025 was supposed to be the year of AI agents, and I think the models did get better. But in enterprises, they still don't act like you would expect them to. And I think when you kind of like take a step back, like one of the things that you realize is the reason's pretty simple. Like agents can read data and they can take action, but they don't know why decisions get made. And I think that reasoning is like what we call decision traces is scattered across different, like, maybe what I like to call decision services, but Slack, different sorts of engagement tools, or they were never recorded at all. And I think that the winners of the future will be companies that are able to capture those traces and sort of turn them into context graphs.
Yeah. What inspired this idea? You published this, I think, 2 days before Christmas, but walk us through your decision traces of like how you arrived at this, right? Help us navigate your context graph, maybe.
Yeah, of course, of course. And I love the framing too. I think, one of the reasons was I was driving to Palo Alto, and I think it's two things. One, it's just a synthesis of like our founders and like I think people were trying to articulate it in some different way or the other. And we had two companies in particular, Tessera Labs and Player Zero, that were saying versions of similar things. And then I think the lucky part about being a VC is that you get to hear what founders are thinking all the time, and you're able to like synthesize like across them. And I don't think people exactly were saying the words like decision traces or context graph. And um, you know, so that was some of it. And I think the second part is like I think the conversation last year, at least on Twitter, it felt like it was drifting towards, like, the wrong bottleneck. I think people were saying, "Okay, the models aren't good enough yet," or, "Models are good enough to propose an action, but the system can't justify it," or, the missing input is, like, something around tokens or better prompting. But I also, I took a look at all the application companies, and I was like, "What is going on here?" And I won't name any specific ones, but I think the thing that was really missing was this like idea of like institutional memory. And like what are those decision services that exist where like where the why exists, and like that can mean constraints, precedents, who can improve this, and even like doing my job, like uh and other people's jobs, like we're not the same as like someone who's been around for 25 years investing, and like why is that? Judgment around people too, like people's decision traces, like they kind of develop over time.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Like, do you view this as a strictly like business, B2B kind of a problem? Because I mean, maybe there's an analog here in saying that the consumer analogy of this is memory, right? Maybe, right? But we've also seen memory kind of not really work out quite as well on the B2C side of AI. Like, curious to get your thoughts there. Is this like a B2B problem, specifically for B2B AI, vertical AI companies?
I'm so happy you asked this question because I think this is like the core distinction and maybe my answer will help make some more sense here. But I think agent memory is one of those ideas that sounds like super obvious until you realize like what most products actually mean by it. And I think in practice, agent memory is like sort of shipped as personalization, like remembering what you like, what you asked me last time, my tone, my preferences, like the reoccurring tasks I do. And I think the value in, consumer settings, that's valuable in consumer settings because the unit of truth is like the user per se. But like I think the biggest difference here is like in B2B, it's not single player. Like you make decisions and like groups of people. Like it's multiplayer. And I think that's why memory has not like sort of become like a clean mainstream layer in enterprise because um, memory also it comes with a lot of different constraints, right? Like, what am I allowed to remember? There's a lot of like uh, things that around security, like why a pricing exception was granted, or like in legal, like maybe I'm not supposed to be able to remember that what some other lawyer did on some other case because that's like sort of conflict of interest, and so I think that is actually the main distinction here. And the second piece is decision traces are actually like already captured as part of like all consumer products. Like when we're on TikTok, like scrolling, how long we're scrolling, like what we like, what we bookmark, what we share with our friends, like inherently those have always been captured. But in B2B, we haven't been able to do that.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I guess you're referring to the Rexus family of, technologies and products where we've been doing this for maybe 2 decades or more now, recommending things based on decision traces of what the consumers are doing.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think that we're going to see like the decision surfaces come more alive in B2B now for a variety of different reasons. But, being able to take unstructured data and synthesize it, being able to like have voice AI, like a lot of decisions are made in different, like, I think a lot of people think of decisions as like, oh, it's like a micro, like, I think with the way we wrote it too, like exceptions, precedents, like, but I think most decisions are actually made in a multimodal fashion. What I mean by that is like over voice or the way we make eye contact or like something about like the tone that shifts. But there's a lot of signal in that as well.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I guess like it's closely tied to this idea of tribal knowledge, I think, that people often throw around in business settings, where there's this unwritten, unsaid thing between you and me that we both understand, and maybe that's built over time. And humans have a way of building that in our head. But businesses don't have an explicit way. And as a new employee, when you join a company, it takes you, I don't know, a couple of months to like really get up to speed on that tribal knowledge.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's always painful when like that one person with all that tribal knowledge leaves. Yeah.
No, I recently talked to this company and they said, oh, yeah, we built this bot. It's called Becky Bot because, Becky left our company recently and we just had her sit down and do like hours of interviews to build Becky Bot before she left so that we had all, I guess, in your parlance, the decision traces of Becky into this one bot.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about it, but yeah.
I think that's actually a fascinating idea too. Just like, and someone jokingly said something around like deademployees.ai one
Uh,
day, like at some dinner, and I was like, interesting. Like to query like employees that are dead and not in the real sense, but dead and like they're not at the company anymore. And I'm like, wow,
yeah.
like, what a concept.
No, super cool. I'm curious to hear like any anecdotes around companies that have been leveraging, your not context graphs itself, but like maybe the idea of context graphs really, really effectively. Is this maybe just feeding agent traces back into the loop somehow, or is this maybe something more here that some companies have been able to do really effectively?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think that we're going to see a lot of different implementations or like representations of the idea. And I think there will be a big opportunity in the infra layer as well as at the application layer. But I think right now, one of the what I've seen more is like at the application layer. And so one example is a company called, Player Zero. The way they talk about production reality is more closer to like traces over time than static documentation. And they're sort of building an AI production engineer for context. But like, I think what matters in the kind of AI SRE, AI production engineer landscape is like not like whether you can go retrieve a run book or like some like list of rules, but like whether you can kind of reconstruct the sequence of decisions and changes that led to a production state and use that history to like debug, prevent repeats of mistakes, and then, making future decisions more consistent. And I think it's like some of it is like treating operational history and decision trails as sort of like first class objects, compared to systems that are just like indexing documents and like working off of SOPs.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess like not specific materialized design docs or anything that, your customer has to assemble by themselves, but almost being able to observe and construct these things on the fly. And yeah, and I guess going off of that though, like does this then belong in the application layer, or does the customer kind of build this themselves and like almost like a Notion like layer that maybe the customers will be starting to build out in terms of being able to supply agents with like, hey, like here's my context graph. Like do with it what you will. Like, do you think anything like that might materialize, or is it just too early to tell?
I think that there will definitely be a huge application layer opportunity. And I think one of the reasons is because like I don't know, can you like does any application come to your mind that's like AI native but also multiplayer?
AI native multiplayer.
Like,
Honestly, this is one thesis I've been thinking about a lot is that coding agents, if you think about them, they have been individual, right? You've had these like individual stalwarts of like, I am now agent pilled. I'm going to be using coding agents for all my coding. And I think Q4 2025 is when I saw a lot of the dominoes falling in a lot of companies. They're like, okay, and I'll try agents now. And now it's slowly becoming a multiplayer experience in a lot of teams and companies where now teams are onboarding onto Cursor, right? Teams are onboarding onto Cloud Code, but a lot of these tools are still optimized for individuals. So we're already seeing a lot of teams, sharing skills, sharing Claude MDs. It's kind of still manually, right?
yeah.
And it can be argued, I think, that there's quite a lot of low hanging fruit. And I'm sure folks at Cursor and Anthropic are looking into this and building out arguably context graph for a lot of this stuff using the agent trace information that's been running. So that's one application I'm really excited about. Um, I think there are a lot of other potential opportunities here. Really, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about as well, and would love to get your thoughts on, is almost this data integration problem, right? We have, the agent builders on one side, all these people are trying to build these agents, and then we have the agent customers on the other side, the enterprises, right? But now it's almost a situation in which the agent builders say, "Hey, I need access to your, um, I don't know, your Datadog, right? I need access to your Notion. I need access to your Google Drive." Like, how does that coordination happen today? That's something I'm really, really kind of like interested in like digging down into. And I think it's a big opportunity actually for any company looking at it, and that's something that we're investigating quite heavily as well here at
Yeah.
Daft. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. And I think what's going to be interesting there is like I'm sure you've heard about like all the API rate limits and
Yes.
from like all the incumbents, and I think rightfully so. If I was them, I'd probably be doing the same thing because I'd be scared. But I think at the end of the day, like customers, like they have the ability to kind of like choose and uh, they have the power in some sense, and so I think that. But you're right that the connectors will be a big opportunity, but I don't think connectors will be sort of enough to like capture the entire opportunity per se.
Yeah. No, why not? What do you think is like kind of above that connector layer? Or do you think that maybe um, you don't actually need that connector layer and a lot of the decision traces are maybe captured on the application layer where, for example, like a company like Player Zero would have access to all these runtime logs almost that would be sufficient?
Yeah. So I think it's actually interesting because you're right, like there's a question, and I think where we're kind of headed is like, is there like a universal infra opportunity? And I think there is. I don't know what the shape of it is yet, but I think at least on the application layer, why it's a little bit easier to start is because and I think animation players here actually he says as well, but there's like five different dimensions to like maybe I think he frames it as like a five coordinate system, and one is like you need to connect state across time, and so what was true then versus like what's true now. And I think people don't think about that because decisions do evolve, like, they update, they're dynamic, based on new information you're receiving. Um, and events like connecting occurrences into sequences and the semantics, you wanna connect the meaning across representations. Like, for example, like churn risk in a support ticket it relates to, like, retention, concerns sometimes in, like, sales notes. Like, there's, like, all these, like, different, meanings in different companies. Um, Attribution is also a hard problem, and then I think the biggest piece of this is, like, the 5th coordinate is, like, outcomes. Like,
Mm,
how do you connect a decision to a consequence? Like, in coding, it's, like, very easy, but in most other domains, it's quite hard because, for example, in sales, like, these sales agents, no one knows why the deal slipped or didn't slip. Like, it's very hard to tie back to the outcome.
yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Do you think that like these things look very different for different verticals? Because I mean, we just talked about sales. You know, there's also potentially I don't know marketing agents, coding agents. Obviously, look very different. Code, I would argue, is a lot simpler of a modality than maybe a lot of these other domains. And of course, there's like healthcare, legal, etc. Do the context graphs for these all look extremely different? Like we mentioned, decisions maybe as a modality, right? But for other kind of companies, it might look very different.
Yeah, and I think the reason it looks different is because, different parts of the organization make decisions in different with different inputs and, with just, like, different end objectives. Like, I feel like the people in marketing don't make the decisions the same way someone in engineering does, and so that's kind of like the thesis around, like, hey, there will be more verticalized context graphs, and, like, you might have to think through, like, what are the different like, parts of a business. And I think, like, places where we've said that, hey, there's, like, good, there's a place to, like, look here is, like, where there are a bunch of high exceptions and, um, where is, like, the word ops attached to each function. So, like, there's, like, RevOps, there's DevOps, there's SecOps, like, all of those are, like, glue between, like, 2 different systems of records, right?
Right.
Um and, like, connecting 2 different functions together, and so those are, like, great places, I think, to start, and historically, they've been too small to essentially sell into, like, no one in RevOps, like, there hasn't been any successful software that's been really sold in there because there haven't been enough people, so, um, I think, you have to kinda get creative about, like, where the pockets of opportunity are, in terms of, like, how to frame the problem.
Yeah, that makes sense. And almost, I guess, you're suggesting that the materialization of what a context graph actually is could be very different between company to company, right? Like an AI company building for coding agents can be building a context graph that looks very different than like a AI company building for, I don't know, finance.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that came out of the blog post was, like, a ton of CIOs reaching out, and, like, you
Yeah,
start hearing about, like, okay, like, they're like, "We would love to apply this," and I'm like, "Okay, like, what's your problem?" And, like, I'm like, "Wait." They'll, like, go on and about the problems, and I'm like, "You have a people problem, I think. This is not a technology problem." Like, I'm like, you know, I was like, "Have you guys tried, like, communication?"
right.
Uh, because it seems more political in nature, and I think probably, like, to Dharmesh's point on how, like, the founder of HubSpot, he made a good point, which at first I was like, "I kinda disagree with you," but then after I, like, hopped on the phone with CIOs, I was like, "Okay, maybe some companies are definitely not ready for this." Uh,
Mm.
I think there are a lot of companies, especially in Silicon Valley, that are ready for this, but, some of these, F50 companies are probably pretty far behind from, like, a data maturity perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. I talked to a lot of enterprises and I realized that like even when you say the word agent, right, it means very different thing.
For sure.
A lot of them just go like, "Oh yeah, our agent, we built this agent. It's a RAG chatbot." And I'm like, "Okay, that's very different than what a lot of other, maybe more AI forward, the startups, the Series A, B stage startups are actually kind of building towards." And I know startups that actively say, "Hey, if you're building a RAG chatbot, like we don't want to talk to you. We only talk to agent companies," which is really interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I think the nature of the problem is also very different, like, the problems that I heard from CIOs, some of them are, like, very physical world problems that require, like, a behavior change, and, like, capturing the decision is going to require a human to do something very differently, like, if someone's in a factory and, like, needs to record why something broke, a machine broke, which is, like, a big problem for a lot of enterprises that do things with factories, like, maybe they do a voice note in the factory instead. And so that's the way you capture the decision versus like they don't have time to go upload text or like upload something. And so some of it is just it's going to be very, very different industry to industry and function to function.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Curious to hear your thoughts around like, will the labs do this? Will the labs just eat our lunch and build kind of a universal solution here? And in addition to that, I feel like there's one other player that I feel like could really do this, which is Glean. I think because they've
Yes.
historically been the one like able to crawl the enterprise like data stack. Yeah, curious to hear about your take on these. Call them incumbents in the space that already have their fingers in every pie in the enterprise.
That's a great question. And wait, sorry, the first one was
So, I mean, think of like the labs, right? Anthropic, OpenAI, they've started building out their data connectors or like, I think, knowledge base, whatever they're calling them. But each of them have their own. And then the second one, I guess, call them the notions and the gleans that already have, their fingers in like the data layer in some of
yeah.
these companies.
It's a good question, and I think about Glean a lot in terms of this, and like, so I think on the labs for the first point, like OpenAI, Anthropic, I think that they will get better at like they'll increase the model intelligence for sure, but I think it's
Yeah.
already pretty smart. Like
Yeah.
like I know you could definitely replace me, like if you captured my decision traces, which unfortunately you have not captured, and I think that institutional memory requires like a very um that institutional memory is like I think pretty it's a different problem and to like what they're building because it's like they can't really capture institutional memory of like different companies and then like put it bake it in the model, right? And so I think it is a very company to company problem versus a model intelligence problem. Now I think some of their forward deployed teams they're going to go and build out applications and all these things and to that extent sure they could do it, but the one thing about B2B is, like, privacy and security, and so, um, if you're serving, like, if they take, like, let's just say they build out an application, they build out Harvey, and they serve all the top law firms, like, they can't really take the decision traces of one and then share them with another, like, that's, like, company IP. The way Wilson Sonsini operates is, like, different than I don't know another law firm because that's all we hear about, but, like, just say another law firm.
Yeah.
Um, but so yeah, I think that's like the different part. And on Glean, I think that is actually a super interesting question. And I would love to hear your take too, but I think Glean can do parts of it. But the hardest part about the context graph, I don't think is like index more stuff. It's like a few things like the capture, the state, the outcome linkage, and the replay, which requires, I think, being in the execute not just the retrieval path, but also the execution path. And I think their superpower is like enterprise search over unstructured artifacts, like finding the right ticket or doc or whatever it might be. And um, I think that's different from being in the place where organizations' decisions are made, approved, and executed. And I think you actually have to be building the app for now in certain parts and being in a specific like you because I think some of the decision traces occur from like the agents like doing some piece of the workflow. Like I think you have to be in the workflow where the at the moment the judgment is being like is happening.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, I think on that point, I think about this a lot. I think Martin Casado kind of made a tweet the other day about how companies that were in the data path did really well in the internet age, and then companies that are doing well now in the AI age are in what he calls the token path, right? And that makes a lot of sense if you think about it, where are you in that hot path of like data to outcome, essentially? And the ones that are in that hot path today are the inference providers and after that, the applications, right? The products. And they have access to every little thing that happened in between. Um, and I made another post about this, kind of a little bit of a blog post that talked a little bit about how my thesis around raw data versus knowledge, which I think is related, right? In the process of doing actions, you kind of turn raw data into knowledge. And in the past, the gold was about raw data retrieval, right? Information retrieval, like Google. right? Glean, the goal here is to surface the appropriate raw data.
Right.
Today, that's very different. The goal today is in surfacing insights, surfacing synthesized knowledge, right? That's kind of what ChatGPT and Claude they're able to do for you. And so I think
Yeah.
just that difference allows companies to kind of be part of that token path and generate these insights along the way, generate the decision traces along the way, and that maybe will empower them. And to your point, Glean, interestingly, has always been more of the Google DNA, right, of like servicing the information retrieval. And so it'll be interesting to see this play out. I do know that I think they've been pushing out a lot of agentic products too. So kind of getting more into that act of synthesizing and not just raw data retrieval. But yeah, I guess those are my thoughts. Curious to hear your take on
Yeah.
those. But
Yeah. I mean, I think you're spot on. I think that they've also come like I think they also started a while ago, and I do think one of their core unique IP is whatever they've done around permissioning.
right.
And I think, I don't know if I'm exactly accurate here, but what I remember from hearing from some people is that like their original, unique IP that they built on their first 2 to 3 years was everything around permissioning and security, which I think that they, in a way, do have cracked that multiplayer thing that we were talking
Yes, 100%.
about. And so I do wonder if that is like some of the moat that they have. But you're absolutely right to bring up Glean. I just think, search probably is not enough.
Yeah, search isn't enough. That is one of my hot takes of 2026. I guess riding off of that, what does 2026 look like if context graphs become a thing? What's the consequences of this? Like, do application companies suddenly become a lot more powerful? Do we see a new emergence of like a new context graph layer, like infrastructure around it? Like, what do you think will happen if your prediction from Christmas holds true?
Yeah, I think it will be that, um, I think one thing it will be like people will demand kind of the same things from agent systems that they demand from like production software, like regression
Right.
test, audit trails, permissions, incident replay, time travel debugging is like some word I heard someone use the other day.
Right. It's almost like maturity of agents, just as we expect software and SaaS to have matured.
Exactly. And I think like I think you'll also start seeing like, one of the things that I like to borrow from Palantir is that they do the what if simulations well, and like because they work with a lot of physical world companies, and like you're able to answer what if. And I think to answer what if, which is a very hypothetical question, like you need to be able to uh understand what decisions a company has made in the past. And so I think we'll start seeing software that's able to do more simulations and answer the what ifs in different parts of the world. Sorry, different industries. Um, I think the other thing that we'll see is that, and it goes back to the point I made earlier, like most organizational decisions aren't single player. Like, the negotiations, escalations, approvals, like there's like multiple people with different contexts converging on a call. And so I think the gap between single player and multiplayer will be very, very obvious. Like, I think you could reimagine Harvey. You could reimagine, I won't name like too many other AI applications, but take like your hot AI app and like rethink how you could build it today. And I think that the answer would be very, very different.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I almost feel like we're gearing up for a war for agent traces. There's already a lot of eval stuff happening. People, oh, capture your traces, do evals over them, right? But if we're talking about where the real gold is, like maybe that's where it is. All the decisions are kind of mined from the agent traces, and multiplayer experiences can be derived from the agent traces, right? And if we're able to maybe leverage that a little bit better and define these workflows over them that make your agents richer, that could be where the real data is. But I don't know. That's one thing I started noticing. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're spot on. What do you think out of curiosity? Like, what does 2026 look like for you guys?
war for agent traces. I think one thing that we've been thinking a lot about is that hey, data for AI has changed a lot. When we started in this role, that was before ChatGPT. The role of data in AI was pre-training. Right, you curate large amounts of data, you crawl the internet. Where I came from in self-driving, you kind of like drive all these cars and gather all this data and then use it to train models. And that was data for AI. I think in 2023, data for AI suddenly became RAG, right? And then in 2025, it suddenly became agentic search and like file systems, right? How do you give these files to an AI to like search over, which works really well for code. I think that the story of data for AI will start to shift towards something more along the lines of maybe context graphs and decision traces in the form actually I think of agent traces. It's really interesting. Like we started running some hackathons within the team and looking at cloud code traces, and we're like, huh. Even though cloud code achieves a good result at the end, the path it takes is kind of bad. And you can actually derive a lot of really interesting insights just based on what cloud code is doing.
Yeah.
The labs are, I'm sure, like scrutinizing like crazy and trying to do better on. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super interesting. Um, very, very interesting.
Yeah. Before we close out, we like to run this hot takes for 2026. What are maybe your top hot takes? I know you have one, which is context graphs. Any others that you like to put out there and see we can circle back at the end of 2026 and see where it lands?
I think the bar for an application is going to be much higher in 2026. And I think one of the reasons being is I think right now everyone's like grabbed the POC budget and like the pilot budget, and like we haven't really seen like the renewal cycles like come to play. And I think a lot of industries bought software because it was safe, or like it was considered like everyone else in the industry bought it, so that's why I'm buying it too, and like I'm checked off my AI box. I think that we're going to see those like verticals like demand, software that works, like and applications that work. And I think that's going to come from decision traces.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I like to quote the two use cases that seem to be working really well, which are number one, coding IDEs, right? And number two, the customer support agents. Do you think these are already like at a level where they are production grade and folks are ready to run with? And maybe the other applications are where the opportunity lies?
So yeah, I think coding agents, definitely. Like I think that one's like, I haven't spent a lot of time there, but I think coding agents, like that opportunity feels like pretty solid right now with what we have. Thanks to companies like Cursor, Player Zero, and a ton of others. I think with the non-coding domains, like that's where there's going to be a lot of like disruption and room for innovation. Um, so yeah, that's probably one. What's your hot take? Do you have a hot take?
My hot take? I have a pretty wild one that I gave a talk about the other day. I was like, hey, like, what if we just don't do retrieval? I mean, just like, here's the thing. What if you treat agents and LLMs as databases and just put all your data in a context window, and then you just like ping them when you need an answer, and then you never have to do retrieval. All your data is kept hot in a context window. Um, what if you treated things the same way as you treated Hadoop versus Spark, right? Keep everything in memory. Uh, and
Take.
that is hot take. I don't think anyone's looking at that. I was like, yeah, like what if you ran a couple of thousand agents and stuffed all the information into these agents and kind of like gas town it, right? And then you don't need retrieval anymore. You just kind of use test time compute every single time to generate these answers. And that I think, to me, is real knowledge, because if you think about it, that's kind of how Wikipedia works, right? It's just like these people with all the context in their head and constantly synthesizing and outputting information and knowledge. And I think that like there's a lot of opportunity here for agents to kind of drive that in a very autonomous way where we haven't really seen with just using LLMs, I think. Yeah, so I do think that the role of information retrieval and the role of data within AI will change dramatically. And um, yeah, I think 2026 might be the year, starting with context graphs and driving some of that discussion around like thinking really hard about where is the data, what is it being used for, and how can we improve the state of context in our agents, and what information can we provide them at runtime.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks so much for joining us today, Jaya. This was super fun. And then yeah, really appreciate your time, and let's circle back at the end of 2026 and see where all this lands, and maybe have a follow up then.
Totally. Jay, thanks so much for having me on.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Zero Shot Espresso. If you liked the episode, share it with another engineer who spends way too much time thinking about data systems in the age of AI. See you next time.